Welcome to this online Maine Science Festival session. My name is Kate Dickerson, and I am the founder and director of the Maine Science Festival. The Maine Science Festival is a celebration of the science and engineering and innovation and technology that happens in Maine. In the before times, we did it as a big, huge 5-day festival. And currently with the pandemic, we are doing online sessions. And I am delighted to be able to have a session this week looking at how Maine's companies stepped up, specifically Maine's biological sciences companies. We have 3 speakers today. I'm going to introduce them right before they speak. And this session would not be possible without the support of the Biosciences Association of Maine, the Jackson Laboratory, and Maine Public, all of whom have helped us pull this together and make sure that we can make this run. So without any further ado, I'm going to go right to our first speaker. It's Olivier de Boekhorst from IDEXX Laboratory. Olivier has been a senior vice president at IDEXX since March 2015, and he oversees the company's water, livestock, poultry, dairy, and Opti medical systems of the business. He's been described to me as the person to talk about IDEXX's work in the testing fields. So I'm delighted to hand him the reins and let him tell us how IDEXX has stepped up in this pandemic time. One quick note, if you have questions that you would like to ask any of our panelists, please put them in the Q&A. We're going to do a big Q&A session at the end after everybody speaks because their sessions flow right together. All right, Olivier, it is all yours.
I hope you can also see the presentation. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. As I may have mentioned to you, I am a political scientist by training, so I don't usually get invited to these festivals, but certainly I should be paying a lot of attention. It's been my pleasure to work with IDEXX for 17 years now, almost to the day. And for those of you who aren't familiar with IDEXX, I thought I would just quickly run through some background on the company to kind of set the stage for how IDEXX responded when the pandemic started. So IDEXX was started in early 80s in Portland, in the 4th Street, I believe, and with a few employees who felt there would be a benefit for animal health if more advanced diagnostics and software capabilities were taken from, let's say, other industries and to the benefit of animals. And since then, we've grown. We're now a global diagnostics company. We're still headquartered in Maine and a proud Maine company. We have 9,200 employees worldwide, but every time I present this slide, I'm behind. So we're growing quite rapidly. We really operate 4 businesses. So one, the biggest business in IDEXX portfolio is our companion animal group business, and we provide solutions to veterinary practices. So if you have a dog or a cat or other pet, and you've brought your animal to a veterinary practice, you're more likely than not to have used an IDEXX test result to determine what, if anything, may be wrong with your animal or your family member. And your veterinary practice is also likely to have used some of our products to schedule your visit, to capture electronic medical record, and to really provide the best service the veterinarian can for you as a pet owner. And what's relevant for our response to COVID is that we operate 80 laboratories worldwide. We're one of the few truly global laboratory networks in any industry. And these 80 laboratories worldwide provide a full scale of services, including real-time PCR, antigen, and antibody testing. We also offer various diagnostic capabilities to the veterinary practice so that while you wait in 20 minutes, your basic hematology, chemistry, and other parameters can be tested. And while you're still at the vet clinic, you can have a conversation with the vet about what follow-up is needed with your family member, the pet. And this too was later deployed to the benefit of the pandemic. Now, the livestock division is another part of IDEXX, and we provide livestock testing kits to large laboratories that screen herds or flocks for various infectious diseases. And we provide both real-time PCR test kits as well as immunoassays and other tests, with the goal of helping livestock health improve, and with that, improve productivity and reduce the impact on the environment. And finally, if you drink water, you're likely drunk some water that is tested with IDEXX products. We provide tests that are used for drinking water and wastewater testing, as well as environmental waters. And more than 2.5 billion people a day drink water that has been tested in one way or another with an IDEXX product. And we're also really proud that we have a customer outside the Earth too, namely the International Space Station also uses our microbiological tests. And so these three divisions, plus our small human diagnostics division, were all faced with, of course, the pandemic early last year. So how did we respond? The various divisions at IDEXX, the various businesses at IDEXX have different but complementary capabilities. So our companion animal group operates those 80 laboratories. So they also develop real-time PCR tests quickly for use in our own laboratories. The livestock division has a capability of manufacturing several million tests per month of real-time PCR tests, and also designing really robust tests that are used in screening laboratories worldwide. The water division, like I mentioned, has expertise in testing wastewaters. And then our human diagnostics business has expertise in getting tests approved. So what we did, and it really was by happenstance that I walked, when we're still allowed to go to our offices, I walked by our R&D team, and our lead designer for livestock tests happened to be there. And I asked him, so how difficult would it be for us to develop a real-time PCR test? Because our colleagues in China were clamoring for one, whether we could develop a real-time PCR test. And my lead designer said that wouldn't be a problem at all. And so in rapid succession, IDEXX was able to first launch a test for pets in our own laboratories. And this was important because, as you may remember, there were some rumors out there that you could get COVID from pets. And that would have been really bad news for our customers, for pet owners, for families. And it wasn't, in fact, true. So by launching this test, we were able to educate veterinarians and pet owners that there was very, very limited risk there. We also then, and I think it took us 7 weeks from beginning of design to launch of a real-time PCR test for humans, similar design. And we were able to scale up manufacturing very, very rapidly with the help of some partners, including Thermo Fisher and others. We were able to launch that test quickly. It was very difficult to develop a test when you couldn't travel. And I still remember we had an IDEXX employee volunteer to take the very first test from Maine on the plane to Ireland to our very first customer. And then he flew right back because only hand delivery of the test was possible at the time. But we launched the test, and it was used in the beginning mostly by veterinary diagnostic laboratories who were asked to repurpose their operations for human COVID testing. So here we had customers that would buy tests for us for like BSE, for example, or swine influenza or other livestock diseases who've been asked to test human samples for real-time with real-time PCR tests for SARS-CoV-2. And those were our initial customers. But then I had an opportunity to talk to Commissioner Lambrou and Dr. Shaw here in Maine, and not only offer them the manufacturing capacity, which, if you remember back in April, May last year, there was a real shortage of tests and all the manufacturers were scaling up rapidly. Well, I was able to offer, on behalf of IDEXX, basically the capacity that was needed by the state of Maine. But then we got to talking, and when I mentioned that IDEXX runs labs and operates labs, we then quickly developed a partnership whereby IDEXX set up a dedicated COVID-19 laboratory in Augusta, Maine, that more than quadrupled the capacity of the state to test for this virus. In July of last year, we then also launched a test for detecting SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater. And interestingly, the virus appears in wastewater before symptoms appear in humans. So by screening wastewaters, you can get an early idea of whether there is an outbreak. And so really combining these 4 divisions' capabilities we were able to set up what you see here is what we lovingly call our trailer, but it's the IDEXX operated COVID-19 testing laboratory under the auspices of the Heddle Lab here in Maine and the CDC. And this capacity that we provided to the state of Maine really helped the state speed up its reopening plan, and has been a great partnership between our company and the state of Maine. So with that, let me pause and see if there's any questions, or we'll take them, I guess, at the end. Kate, to you.
We can, yeah, we're going to take them at the end. So we'll bounce to our next speaker. Next up, we have Dr. Norman Moore. And Norm is the Global Director of Scientific Affairs for the Rapid Diagnostic Division of Abbott. In 2019, he received Abbott's Valweiler Fellowship Award. I hope I pronounced that right, Norm, for lifetime achievement in science. And as an aside, I think anyone who can get a lifetime achievement award in anything, it's pretty awesome, but to get it for science is one of the most inspiring things I've heard. And something that we can all reach for, I think. Norm has 8 US patents and 31 non-US patents. And he's presented many, many times on different types of testing for infectious diseases. I am delighted to have Norm with us and have him talk about what Abbott did with their pandemic response. So Norm, I will pass the baton to you.
Awesome. Thank you all. And I'm very excited to be here. It's so exciting to see, amazingly, how big Maine has been with this whole pandemic. It's absolutely phenomenal. From the tests we make, and you heard of IDEXX, you're going to hear about Abbott, and even the swabs. I mean, Puritan is one of the biggest swab companies in the world, and we've all been involved very, very dramatically. So just to kind of start, I want to talk a little bit about Abbott. Abbott was just named, I think it was Fortune magazine that named it one of the top 50 most admired countries in the entire world. And that's up there with, Apple and Amazon and all those other companies. So it's been a very, very difficult, exciting year. We have over 100,000 people where, many, many, many countries, 34.6, whatever, billion in sales. And there's a ton of divisions, and I really won't go through them all, from all of our, nutritional to lab-based. What we really want to talk about here is, what we've done in Maine. And I'll say this, I came to Maine about 26 years ago to work for a small company called IDEXX at the time. And IDEXX was this tiny little company. We were actually centered in this old bakery. And during the hottest parts of the summer, you could actually even see, molasses still seeping up from some of the floorboards. So that's the history that we came from. And believe it or not, that little tiny thing was able to really transform a lot of rapid diagnostics as we know it. We made one of our early splashes with some of our pneumonia tests, where we actually developed ways to, find out what type of pneumonia you had from urine. And that all of a sudden, a person peeing in a cup, in 15 minutes, you can know what type of antibiotic to give that person. It became a game changer. And because of that, it was put in all of the infectious disease guidelines throughout the world. So it was an exciting time where, if I went to Chile or if I went to somewhere else, you could walk into the laboratory and see the Maine-made product right on those shelves. And, one of the things that we came out with afterwards was influenza testing. And at the time, there really weren't good treatments for influenza. So, we didn't know if that would be a commercial success or not. And believe it or not, that really took off as, that changed how everybody tested. And it became the #1 test throughout the entire world for influenza. And it became the standard where people were testing for influenza because they knew that it was infectious and there were things you needed to do. The treatment was only good for the first 48 hours. So we really kind of changed things with all these tests. For so long, it was, if you were sick, you went to the hospital, and quite often you had to sit for hours on end trying to get those lab results back. And by putting these tests out, by really kind of embracing point of care, we opened up where a lot of this testing would be. So rather than now going there, you could go to the doctor's office, the urgent care clinics. Even now we're going into the pharmacies. So bringing things closer to the patient, you really got a lot better results because you didn't have, without waiting, you knew exactly what it was and you could treat that much more accordingly. So I'm going to take a step back and say, okay, last year, it was an incredible year for everybody. I mean, it was something that in the end, I think the companies here will be very, very proud of, that we made a difference, not only US, but globally. We had this outbreak happen. We saw the cases of COVID-19 in China, and we really didn't know what was going to happen. As a microbiologist, we were keeping our eyes on it. But still back then, we weren't fully aware that what it was going to do to change everybody's lives. As things started to come over, Italy hit up, we knew that it was going to hit the United States. And so Abbott started jumping right in, and it was utterly amazing that by March, we had launched a few tests. We had launched a big lab-based analyzers, but the other thing we launched was a thing called ID Now. And what that is it's molecular testing. It's akin to PCR, but it uses one temperature, and it's a small little machine that can be brought and get that lab quality result wherever that instrument goes. So what we did with that ID Now is all of a sudden people were taking that and putting it in tents, drive-throughs for testing, because one of the big issues what you saw with COVID is this is highly, highly infectious. And so the idea of bringing somebody in that could be infectious into a hospital where they may be sitting next to a chemotherapy patient, a geriatric patient, exposing them was really too big a risk. And so by changing everything, by bringing that molecular-based testing to all of these unique sites, it was phenomenal. And it was something that really changed a lot of things. So Abbott continued pushing, and they came out with another lab-based analyzer, Architect, in April. In May, we came out with more base tests. But one of the unique things here.
Hey, Norm, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt very quickly. If you could try to restart your video and share your slides again. I think I've cleared up a technical error on my part.
All right. Can you see them again, or should I try one more time?
Try one more time, please.
You got it.
I know we had it going before we turned on the webinar, so. All right, there we go.
Awesome. And
if you want to rewind just a little bit, you are welcome to. With apologies to our audience, we will have this mastered by the time we can all meet in person again.
There you go. And I won't start over. I won't do that to you guys. I've given 3-hour lectures, and dear God, that's not what you're here for. So again, talking about Abbott, talking about some of the unique tests that we did, and just kind of showing you the history of what happened. So we had that molecular test. One of the big things is to reopen the country, we needed to make it far more available to everybody. We needed to democratize it. We needed to be able to give it to schools and a lot of other places. So we took that technology, that basic influenza test that we've been making for 25 years, and we started making these cards. And these cards all of a sudden were winning awards because you were able now to do testing everywhere. And we're even now doing testing in the home, where you can actually have this sent to your home, proctored on a screen, and be able to get that result. So when it comes to this right now, we have seen that this now Binax Now test, it was stunning. We made an entire brand new factory in Westbrook, Maine from the ground up. It was one of those wild bets that Abbott made, that we couldn't wait to see if we could make a test and then make a factory. We actually had to make a factory before we even started the R&D, so that we could actually have them all come together at the end. So here we have this brand new factory in Westbrook. It took 4 months to make, and now it's producing 50 million tests per month. And we're even going beyond that. So it's been a phenomenal culture change. And I mean, I don't want to say that Maine can do attitude, but really a lot of it has been there, that we've been able to do a lot. And I got to say, the Abbott resources have really been able to be there so we could take these risks. So we're seeing this in nursing homes and schools and return to the workplace. So not to kind of belabor anything, and I won't do this to you guys, but just to kind of say, you take these simple little swabs. I won't stick this up my nose to show you guys, but even kind of putting it right into this device, you add some drops, you close it, and you've got the answer wherever you are, the school and all that, within 15 minutes. So it's been very, very helpful to try to get some normalcy back as soon as humanly possible. So with that, again, thank you to Maine for what you've really allowed us to do. It's been a very exciting place. We're really happy to be in Maine.
Norm, that was great. Thank you. And I appreciate your patience as we sorted out the technical difficulty here. We're going to go right to Dr. Richard Lussier. Rich has he's at Jackson Laboratory. He has 30 years of experience supporting, using, and commercializing biotechnology. And he was he used one of the very first automated DNA sequencing systems in the world as part of his research while a PhD student at the University of Vermont, which I think, it's a really good example of the ways that biotechnology and bioscience and have really grown in leaps and bounds in the last 20 or 30 years. It's a whole different world. And then he spent 15 years with much of that abroad once he got his PhD, much of that time in Asia, and got back just in time to see the Red Sox win their first World Series championship in '86, beating the curse of the Bambino once and for all. And as a longtime Mets fan, I can appreciate how much that was enjoyable for him, and was personally happy it didn't happen in 1986. So my apologies for that. Not really. For the past 4 years, Rich has been the clinic's genomics program director at the Jackson Laboratory, which includes managing the Jackson Clinical Laboratory. And I'm going to let him explain what all of that means. But one bit of information that I find really interesting is that the clinical laboratory has delivered over 1.2 million COVID test results since March of 2020. So that is an extraordinary number for something that a year ago from today, we didn't even have a test for, really. So Rich, I will let you take over and we will jump right in.
Okay, so hopefully you can see my presentation, yes?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so I will apologize because I didn't prepare a slide on the background for Jackson Laboratory, but I'll just talk to it very quickly. So Jackson Laboratory was founded in 1929, so 92 years ago, with the sole mission of using mouse as a model organism to study human disease. And initially, that disease was cancer. Over the years, the programs have been expanded so that the mouse is used as a model for many human disease, including inherited diseases, lifestyle diseases, and everything in between. And in fact, Jackson Laboratory has a biorepository or mouse repository system that presently has somewhere on the order of about 12,000 different mouse models that have been developed over the years, both at Jackson Laboratory as well as by collaborators. So it's a tremendous resource in the world of mouse genetics as well as mouse models for human disease. There are 65 faculty members on 3 different campuses of Jackson Laboratory, in Bar Harbor, which is the main location that we have, also in Farmington, Connecticut, and in Sacramento, California. It's an NCI designated cancer center, and as such, our interest in cancer led to the creation of what is called a CLIA laboratory at Jackson. And what is a CLIA laboratory? It's a laboratory that's organized under the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments of 1988. And this was a federal or actually a program that was enacted by Congress in response to concerns over some test inaccuracies prior to the enactment of the CLIA amendments. And at the time, the regulation for laboratories in the United States was limited to hospital laboratories and independent laboratories, but most of other laboratories that could at the time deliver clinical results were not at all regulated. So under CLIA, a facility that performs tests on humans specifically for purposes of diagnosis or for determining treatment courses for disease or for the prevention of disease are now regulated under the CLIA amendments, or the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments. Since 1988, this has been administered by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid in close collaboration with the FDA as well as the CDC. So the regulations kind of set a complexity level of what the laboratory is engaged in, whether the complexity is very low of the test that they perform, in which case you could be waived, a moderate complexity test, or a high complexity test. And each of those have definitions and requirements. And really what the goal here is to establish a set of rules that would be applied to all laboratories across the country that are performing similar types of tests and at similar levels of complexity. Our laboratory at JAX is a high complexity laboratory. And one of the things that sets apart a CLIA laboratory from just a standard clinical laboratory is the fact that a CLIA lab has a process, or can follow a process, to develop its own test called an LDT, or laboratory developed test. So since CLIA laboratories can develop their own tests, it means that they can offer tests that are not otherwise commercially available. So a test that wouldn't be developed by IDEXX or Abbott because perhaps the market is very small for that test, it's very narrow, or perhaps the test is developed because there's a particular specialty in the organization that would bring some expertise to that type of testing. So that's one of the distinctions. And the other, again, based on the development of the laboratory developed tests, allows also to react very quickly in something like a COVID-19 pandemic. So JAX's first COVID-19 test that was developed about a year ago was an LDT. We've since moved over to an FDA approved test under the emergency use program. But the very first test that we developed was actually an LDT. Just to give you a sense of the history of the CLIA laboratory at Jackson, we started out in 2015 by getting our CLIA and College of American Pathology certification. In 2016, we started a collaboration with Alphon Foundation that was continued last year for the testing of cancer patients in the state of Maine, where we actually look at the tumor and are able to profile it. In those 36 months, we did about 2,200 cancer tests. In March of last year, we launched the COVID test. And since then, we've actually delivered 1.3 million results in the 12 months since just about since this date a year ago. So the subject of this talk is how JAX was able to step up. So I've just put a few things down here for purposes of discussion. So one of the areas that we have contributed in the research field is by developing a transgenic mouse model. So that means that it's a mouse that has some human genes, and specifically the human gene that it includes is for the receptor that the SARS-CoV-2 virus binds to in humans, which is the ACE2 site. So the ACE2 receptor is where the SARS virus binds. And one of the very first things that we developed was a transgenic mouse to be able to have a platform by which researchers could look at the way that the virus gets into cells and what happens in those cells once the virus enters. So that's the extent of what I know about mice. And as much as I am a JAX employee, a proud JAX employee, that's unfortunately about the level of my expertise there. But my area of focus being in the CLIA laboratory, and as a timeline further to the slide that I just showed, we means a small group of people, 4 or 5 people, met, of course, at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon last March. And we sort of decided at that point that we wanted to do something to help in this pandemic beyond what we could do to support researchers in the field. So on that date, we decided that we were going to look into what we could do, put the CLIA lab to use. Between the 6th of March and the 24th of March was a frenzy of activity to develop, validate, and get a virology license for our CLIA laboratory, which previous to the 20th of March didn't have one. And then we set up a test that was able to do 150 per day, and we scaled that capability or that capacity up to essentially 12,000 tests per day in about a 4-month period of time. We've delivered 35,000 tests to the University of Maine test results, about 6,000 test results to Maine Maritime Academy over that period. What that allowed for is the safe return to on-campus learning, or in the case of Maine Maritime Academy, on-ship learning. And it allowed some of the seniors from Maine Maritime Academy to finish their final cruise by being cleared and free of COVID before they boarded the ship. So very proud of that. Over 100,000 of the 1.3 million tests have been reported to the state of Maine, to our hospital partners, nursing facilities, schools, and workplaces, including the Jackson Laboratory. And we've also employed roughly about 80 new employees, people working in the COVID or in the virology laboratory since we established the test a year ago. Many of those folks are temporary staff, but still it's 80 people who may have otherwise found it challenging to land a job in the midst of a pandemic. This is just a quick view of some of the laboratory, and what you can see in the top left panel are a couple of the 4 Hamilton robots that, actually 5 Hamilton robots that we have. Those are where the automated test process takes place. That was the piece of the laboratory, those 4 or 5 components allowed us to scale from 150 tests a day up to greater than 10,000 a day. The top right is just a very simple plot of the number of tests delivered on a daily basis going back to March of last year. And you can see how that scale up happened. In fact, sort of in that December and January timeframe is where we were seeing the highest demand in terms of tests per day. It's actually off scale at about 12,000 a day is what we were reporting. And then the bottom right are the sequencers that we use in a new area that we've been focusing lately. And you probably have heard a lot or seen a lot on the news or read in the papers about different strains of the virus that are popping up. And the definitive way to identify the strain of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that is presently infecting folks is to take a sample of that virus and to sequence its entire genetic code from start to end. And the instruments that are used for that are on the bottom right. And this allows us to identify the specific variants and strains that are present in Maine and the other 49 states that we have been serving through our CLIA laboratory. We've literally reported cases to all 50 states in the course of the pandemic going back to last March. So that is how JAX has contributed to the pandemic in at least in a small way, explaining how we've contributed. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was great, Rich. Thank you. We will jump to questions and answers, Q&A, and to anyone who's with us, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A. I will get to them. I'm going to start off. My mind is it's kind of boggling to me how big the scale up was for all three companies, right? It's kind of an extraordinary feat of, I want to say engineering, but I know that that's not it. So I think if it's at all possible for you to explain how you were able to do it in 24 hours a day. Maybe that's too much to ask, but Rich, you had a big leap up and you said it was the robots that helped you scale up the testing itself, but it couldn't have just been the robots. There had to be other facets to it. So we can start with you, Rich, and then we'll just kind of go around the circle there.
Yeah, I remember back in literally a year ago in March when we were going through this, and I've had the luck in my career of having been involved in some pretty significant product introductions and technology innovations. And I mentioned to the folks that were the core, roughly dozen or so people that were the core of the CLIA lab prior to COVID-19, that when you sit back and look at this sometime later in your lifetime, and honestly, these folks are 20-somethings, so it is, in their future, as opposed to for me. But when I said, you'll sit back and look at this time in amazement at what you were able to achieve. And now a year on, that has come to fruition. And you're right, it is the people. And it was very largely the people. The people had to research the technologies that could be applied from what was available. So it's not just, what's the best one to apply? It's what is the best one that's available to apply and to adapt it. And that's really the people who put the thought and energy into that. We had folks who were working 300 hours a month in March and April to get this up and running and going. The automation certainly helped. And as I said, we were able to identify stuff that was available and that we could put to use, but it was really the people factor and the fact that these folks just were selfless in the amount of hours that they were willing to spend. They knew what was at the other end. They knew what they were doing was making a difference. And I think that was really what was the true motivator.
I'm seeing a lot of head nodding from Oliver and Norm. I'll let you both jump in with any additional comments.
Well, I concur completely with what Rich was just saying. So it really was the people factor. As leaders, we can help provide some focus and some priorities, but especially at the beginning of this pandemic, everybody was doing this in addition to their day job, and we were worried about our day jobs also because at the beginning, veterinary clinics were closing and livestock laboratories weren't ordering tests. And so, that turned around. But in the meantime, a lot of people jumped on this opportunity to do something for our community. It was very much driven by, we're a diagnostics company. We should be able to help somehow. And what is that way? And, this was a global initiative across many business units that helped us scale up our manufacturing in the beginning of just the test kits. We were just, I think in many ways, fortunate that we had these combination of skills and a good network of people that decided to put them all together to do something. It's really all been a people driven, more than anything else, effort for IDEXX.
Not to beat a dead horse, but people think is really been phenomenal. We set up 2 R&D groups, Stacey Huth and Steve Kovacs, and literally they had two separate groups going literally 24 hours a day, where, you have a night shift, morning shift, and so the R&D people were working that much. I got a call, and I've been here 25 years, and they said, if you don't get your stuff out of the office, it's gone, because they just bulldozed all the offices, because it was all production. And we had to realize that it was, in some ways, I'm less important than the production person that's got to get those tests out to the medical community. I don't want to almost sound like there's tears in my eyes, but we all worked, throughout. I mean, there were no things as weekends. I mean, it was everything, because we knew that we were front lines for trying to get to save lives. I mean, that sounds a little too grandiose, but it really was to that point. And for the other companies here as well, it's something Maine should be proud of.
So I've heard from a number of folks that the obstacles weren't just, not enough hours in the day and doing multiple jobs, but even the supplies that you all had to rely on, reagents, and how do you develop a test if you don't even know you have the right materials, and how do you even know how to start? And you each touched on this a little bit. Oliver, you said you're a diagnostic company. There must be something we can do. And Rich, you said that, Jax has developed their own test, the laboratory test. And Norm, Abbott has been doing tests forever, but how do you both develop something that has never been seen before? And then how do you make sure you have the supply from other places to get that test so that even once you produce it, it's useful? And I don't know who to start with. I want to hear from all three of you. I imagine that the answers are somewhat similar and yet different. So how about this time we'll start with Oliver.
Thank you. Yes, so this is where, as an organization, you rely on everything you've done before the pandemic hits. So we had partnerships, longstanding partnerships that we relied on quite heavily, and our supply chain team put in a lot of hours to find simple things like pipette tips. Were in short supply, and you can see. I see, Rich, you had maybe the same challenge as we did. RNA master mix, just all these components that we use in our products every day became rapidly in short supply at the beginning. So working with our supply network, and we have a dedicated team of professionals who work on this with us, and our partners, we have solidified our partnerships through this effort as well. And that really relies on what you do. How prepared were you to take advantage or to react to a certain opportunity? So we're very happy that all our partners stepped up with us to try to combine. And then we forged some new partnerships too, right? So with the state of Maine, for example, and with other entities that you can't do it alone. And so it was very much a group effort, I think, for us to be able to meet the demand that something was upon us.
Norm, I'll hand it to you.
Government. State of Maine, national, walking to our suppliers and saying, okay, if it takes you 3 months, we're going to need it literally in 10 days. I mean, it was something that, and it was a kind of a question of saying, okay, to these suppliers, if they said, well, it can't be done, well, what part can't be done? And working with them to make these things happen. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, the permits that Maine would help get to just even ship things down to build these new facilities. Industry, government, everybody stepped up. It was such a partnership to get this done. I'm very, very proud of everybody.
And Rich?
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky in the sense it's not like in the case of Norm and Abbott, where they invented a nice, packet test that you can conduct. We didn't have to invent anything. The technologies that we were using that are available from IDEXX and Abbott and others were sort of off the shelf for us at the beginning. So we were able to put things together, but the supply chain absolutely was a challenge, especially in the scale up, as you would imagine. And Oliver hit on my one nightmare, which was running out of pipette tips for the automation. And we were going through, I don't actually recall the number, but we were going through about a pallet of tips a week. So just to sort of put that in some perspective, a pallet is, you know how big a pallet is, and it's piled high with cases of tips. And we were going through a pallet a week, actually more than that during the peak of it. And, you know, you just get overwhelmed by the fact that you land, you know, these suppliers, and you rely on your suppliers, but you don't really think very often that their supply chain also is being impacted, and it goes way down the chain. So there was, for a while, a shortage of filters that go into the tips of pipettes to keep them from getting contaminated. And there was a worldwide shortage of those, which kind of rippled through the pipettes themselves, the pipette tips themselves. And it was just, it was a real challenge to try and keep on top of it. But I'll agree with my colleagues that people stepped up, not only from JAX, obviously, but from our suppliers. They knew how important what they were doing was as well. And you know, everybody was bending over backwards to make sure that we all got through this together.
So I'll go to a similar question, I guess, or with all that your three companies have accomplished in the last year, I don't think anybody sat down last February and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do 1 million+ tests, and and this is how we're going to do it. What do you think was the hardest thing? What was the hardest thing that you haven't already mentioned that you had to get through? And what do you think, based on all that you've learned in the last year, you'll continue to take with you as you move on and things settle down from this and we go on to whatever the next step of our lives look like? So it's a, you know, super easy question for all of you, really piece of cake. And Norm, since I haven't put you on the spot first, I'll do that to you. So, you know, what was most surprising about what you've accomplished, but what do you expect that you'll take going forward?
It's a hard question. I think one of the things is just the unending pace. I mean, everything needed to be speeded up like historically we've never ever seen. I mean, you know, in the old days, you'd have a couple centrifuges. We had to get by rows and rows of centrifuges, had them set up. So forget weekends, forget nights, you know, to see everybody working that many hours, to see the families, and let's not forget the families that had to give up seeing us to get this done. So, you know, after 12, 14-hour days, just sitting on the couch trying to put coherent thoughts together was a difficult thing. It was so, I mean, I know I keep saying family, but just, we had to rely on each other. And it was, wow. Every production worker, and thank God for those production workers, you know, just all the different languages that had to come in, get them all making this to make sure that we could make it in the highest quality. I'm rambling right now, but there's so many people to thank. It's just amazing.
I'll punt to you, Oliver.
I would echo many of Norm's comments. When we started the laboratory in Augusta, what ended up being a very big challenge is just recruiting, finding technicians who had the right CLIA backgrounds. And we recruited from all over the United States to find laboratory technicians. And it's interesting, I really love coming to Maine, so that's good. And that certainly helped, but that was a very significant challenge. The other very significant challenges, you know, when you're making maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of something, and now you have to make millions of something else of the same thing, you know, that's going to benefit us in the future. We're now able to react even more quickly to African swine fever because we have COVID-19. But that certainly was a very big challenge for our manufacturing and supply chain teams, who are now have forged even closer bonds and are able to react to outbreaks of other diseases in the future, I think, as well. So there's a whole series of things where just scaling up, just by doing something 100 times bigger or 1,000 times bigger than you used to do, where you're really pressure testing the systems and the processes you have as an organization. And we've made some adjustments, and I think it's going to do, you know, it's going to benefit us going forward. I think it's the team, the interpersonal relationships that have been built as we go through this that will be the most enduring part of this, though. And I think that it's really helped the entire IDEXX team to have been part of this small effort, because there were many other things we were doing at the same time, of course. But I think it's really was good for employee engagement just generally.
Rich, do you have anything else to add to that?
Just along the lines of the lasting lessons is, probably the primary one that I think of all the time is that you need to be prepared for something like this to happen again. And you don't know when it'll be, of course, and you don't know what it will be. But the lessons learned from this really put us in a pretty good position to be able to react quickly the next time. We all hope there isn't one, but the reality is there probably will be one. I think that the lessons learned are really applied to how you'll be able to react the next time something unexpected comes up.
So I want to circle back. I made a couple of notes as you all were speaking, and one of the ones that I think there's been so many things that have happened in the last year that we've forgotten about just because we've been overwhelmed with information, right? So it's actually easy for me to forget that Abbott came out with a 15-minute test, which it's ridiculous, right? Because in any other year, that would be the big, huge, do the test, grab a cup of coffee, get the result, then you can go to work or not, right? And then the wastewater test, and then the number of tests that Jackson has run through. So I'm not entirely sure. I guess my question here is, if you could explain, each of you, just a little bit more detail on those bits of pieces. So the IDEXX wastewater, right? We've forgotten about, and I'll circle back and remind all of you, the wastewater testing has been huge. And I remember there being a lot of controversy when it first came out, that people were like, oh, really? Come on, you're going to test wastewater and it's going to show you. And it has. So I'm wondering how much IDEXX, I don't want to say played around with it, but how much did you really work to figure that out and then say, yes, this is something that we can do?
So I think we considered options and thought through potential demand, but at the end of the day, it was an unknown. And so you have to have a little bit of vision too, and say, we can provide this to our customers, and we know the technology is something we could develop quickly, and then we can support our current customers, because that's one of the important things. What were our current customers asking us to do, right? So when you have the largest BSE lab customer saying we would like a COVID-19 test, that encourages you to then, of course, move forward and provide that. Or when public utilities are asking for the wastewater test, same thing. So I would say speeding up that decision-making process and managing through some unknowns and with unknowns and still making good decisions was part of the exercise that we had to go through to be able to launch these tests. But it was, IDEXX sticks to its knitting. Where there's a few customer groups that we provide tests to, and so that also somehow limits maybe some of the business risks that you take when you start to engage on a new project like this or a new effort like this. So, but yes, it was unknown how much wastewater testing would take place, and what was known is that there were studies early on showing that COVID could be detected in wastewater before symptoms showed up, and so that was clearly an important thing for us to try to advance.
That was one of the coolest bits that came out of the information. Just as someone who's observing the science from the outside, I thought that part was really just fascinating.
Well, the challenge with wastewater is, the challenge with wastewater is more, what do you do with a positive result? That's really
right.
We still get a lot of questions about that. So
yeah, it's not just, then you get it and it's like, huh? Well, yeah. So it's really fascinating. Norm, how about you? I mean, Abbott, it's not an unknown world for Abbott with the testing, but how do you figure out 15 minutes? How do you figure out to make it work? How do you figure out to make sure the efficacy is something that people are comfortable with?
That's going to be one of the challenges. I mean, believe it or not, we actually had 2 Rose Garden events for both the ID Now and BinaxNOW. This little Maine, it was phenomenal. But the luck that we had was that we had a very deep history in respiratory virus testing. So if we didn't have that, I don't think we could have really accommodated this. So we looked at all of our work in influenza and respiratory syncytial virus and said, okay, we're going to have to copy a lot of that. Now, with the molecular tests, we were able to get the sequences to get it done. With the antigen-based test, we had to, obviously come up with those reagents and the scale of that. So I guess my answer comes down to, because of the history we had, we were able to rely on that to really kind of build off of that and get something out much quicker.
Excellent. Rich, you guys went from 2,200 cancer tests to an extraordinary number of COVID tests. I mean, the difference between those numbers is really almost unimaginable. And I realize they're different types of tests, I think, but it's still pretty extraordinary. How did you know that you could even do that? Or did you?
Well, we didn't know that we couldn't, so that helps. When when you're not told that you can't do it, I guess you just figure out the way to do it. But the one thing that that really kind of came to light is that none of it would have been possible without a significant investment and support from information technologies. I mean, that's really the huge difference when you're doing 50 or 60 tumor profiling tests a month. You can get 50 or 60 test orders on paper, and that's fine. You can't get 10,000 orders on paper in a single day and hope to be able to process it with a normal number of people. So it was really the informatics that allowed us to be able to scale like that. And I think we all knew that that was going to be a factor. I don't think any of us realized how much of a factor the informatics was and how fragmented the tools for doing that are, and how you had to piece them together, string them together, and then ultimately, get a system that worked from beginning to end.
It's a really good reminder that not any one organization or any one part of one organization lives in a bubble, and there's heavy reliance on other parts of the company. And often I think people forget about information technology and data analysis and big data and all of those things, and they all work together. One of the things we try to do at the festival is remind people that no one's in a bubble, right? You all three are in your individual offices, but by no stretch, not one of you have said, oh yeah, I did it all by myself. It's all been completely talking about the teams. And it's very clear to me that the teams have been multifaceted, multidisciplinary, and vital. That is just about all that we have time for. I would like to give you each the opportunity, if you want, to give us some words of wisdom as we rise out and hit spring of 2020. Which right now, hopefully, at least as far as I'm concerned, looks very different than spring of 2020 did. So you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, I will plug what we've got coming up next. All right. I was really happy to have Norm mention Puritan and the swabs, because they're actually part of our focus next week, but in a totally different way. We're going to have them with Chinbro, and they're going to talk about how they built 2 new buildings to manufacture these swabs. They are the world leaders in swabs, and Chinbro stepped up with them. And they're going to talk about how they pivoted. And we also have a Mossy Ledge Spirits, and they're going to talk about how they went from spirits to get people through the pandemic, but that's not entirely clear. How they changed what they're making to get people through the pandemic. And then we have 2 folks after that who are going to talk about the following week about public health and vaccine distribution. And then our bonus, the very last week of March, we're going to be talking about what the different vaccines are and how they work. So the next 3 weeks for the Maine Science Festival are continuing our search on COVID and our conversation about COVID, so we can make sure that people recognize just kind of what an extraordinary time we're in right now. I am deeply indebted to the 3 of you for giving me just a little bit of your time. I hope that our listeners have gotten even just a little bit more inspired by what we have here in Maine. You all kind of fulfilled my role of talking about how amazing Maine is with this stuff, but I really appreciate that it's not just coming from me. Thank you all for the work that you've done. Thank you for losing sleep. thank you for helping get us through this as much as possible. And I hope in the coming years, we will be able to talk about this and continue to highlight what Maine has done, but more importantly, give you all a chance to get a break and listen about some other science work and just sharing the joy of that.
Thank you all.
Thank you.